I'm absolutely delighted, and believe me, I am delighted to be able to present a full panel to you today. And we're going to explore crowdsourcing. And actually, what is it? So the term crowdsourcing actually was only coined in 2006. But it's been going on for donkey's years, and in fact something like, if you look back into the mists of time, the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, was probably a brilliant example of crowdsourcing, where they actually just threw it open to the community and said, give us words and show us how they've been used, and we'll put them in the dictionary. And I think back in 1740, the government actually launched the Longitudinal Prize, and that was directed to a crowdsourcing approach to find the best way of mapping and plotting ships' longitudinal positions, and that was awarded. So crowdsourcing isn't new. The Indian government did it about 3 years ago when they were actually trying to design a picture on the rupee. Threw it out to the community, came up with a fantastic new design. So it's not new, but what is it? And actually, what is it within our space? And a question that we will be posing to the panel is, does it work? And how do we know that? So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ada Gaskell from the Social Business Consultancy, Dan Perez, founder and CEO of Marblar, and Stefan Platz, who's head of drug toxicity, metabolism, drug safety at AZ. All of whom bring some very different approaches. The way we're going to run this session, don't worry, plenty of time for questions, is the guys here are just going to give you a very quick sort of top line, crowdsourcing, what it means to them, where they fit within the space. We've got a couple of interesting questions that we might play around with, and we're going to open the floor up to you. So I'm actually going to ask Dan to kick off for us, please. Sure. What is crowdsourcing? What are your views?
No, sure. And so at Marblar, what we do is actually we try to find new commercial uses for dormant IP. But as we've looked at crowdsourcing, we don't call it, we do crowdsourcing. There's a lot of people who are trying to engage a community to solve a task. It could be a complex task, it could be a simple task. And so what we see is there's various overlapping ways you can call it. So you call it crowdsourcing, you call it co-development, you call it outsourcing, really, and that you just need something done by somebody who's not in-house, right? And so, from our perspective, when we see people or organizations or platforms trying to engage a wider community to take on, a relatively trivial task, is this galaxy turning left or right? Is this purple or green? That's basically crowdsourcing. Sometimes you have organizations who break down their goal into various tasks, various steps, and then they try to engage people along the way. The organization takes it at step 3, they put it up to the crowd at step 4, they come back, the organization itself comes back at step 5. That's more like co-development, and we could go through several examples of very successful organizations who do that. And then there's other people who just basically are a platform where they kind of outsource complex tasks to people out there, and the people who engage are looking to make a buck. Sometimes they enter as individuals, sometimes they enter as firms, and it's really no different than a scalable platform that allows you to outsource, right? And so a lot of people are throwing this kind of term crowdsourcing almost as a buzzword, but as Alison mentioned, it's been around for a while, and it's really just various different incarnations sometimes of just outsourcing.
Thank you. Stefan, you're sitting within a large pharmaceutical company. What are your views and experiences of crowdsourcing?
I think being in a large pharma company, if you hear the word crowdsourcing, you definitely link it to some biotech, web-based. It's a little bit nebulous. We talk about collaborations. We talk about partnerships. Does that fit with the definition of crowdsourcing? So, for example, EZ has started recently to announce a collaboration with the MRC, where we offered some drugs to them. We had discontinued, deprioritized, and now it's open to investigators, researchers, to explore if they want to come up with a proposal of redefining an idea or drug for a new target. The question is that really what immediately people have in mind when it comes to crowdsourcing? I think it is. Because what it does in this collaboration, like with the MRC or what we have with the National Center of Academy and Science in the US, it is offering scientists the opportunity to come up with ideas, researchers, and to offer new proposals how to reposition a drug. And there are quite some successes recently. How is this going to happen to be successful? So I think it's really up to the definition, as we heard it, what do we embrace under this big umbrella of crowdsourcing?
Thank you. And Adi, you've got some interesting views from the perspective that you come from.
Yeah, I mean, crowdsourcing can encompass all manner of different things, and coming from an IT background, I certainly empathise with Martino and the relative jargon in different professions and the lack of translation between those professions. So whether it's crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, open innovation, co-creation, they're all doing similar kind of things. But I think from a scientific perspective, there are some interesting developments outside of the idea generation process itself. So Dan mentioned about Marblar and their efforts to open up intellectual property, but you've also got things like the open notebook science movement, who are attempting to open up the actual research process itself. So you're learning from the failures as well as the successes, which is quite a challenge for an industry that's not traditionally done that way. But you've also got crowdsourcing initiatives that are looking at things outside of the idea generation process. So Springboard, for instance, they're tapping into research from patients for drug development ideas. You've also got a platform called the Platform for Engaging Everyone Responsibly, who are looking to the crowd for improvements in the clinical trials process. Now, there was research published last week, I think it was, by Eli COI, that revealed that something like 16% of cancer patients actually have access or are aware of access to clinical trials that they could participate in, which is a pretty low number, and that must be hindering the research process. So there are efforts to improve that as well. And then you've got the citizen science movement and various attempts to gamify science and get people involved in the actual research itself. So you've got iWire, which was developed by MIT, which is looking to gamify neuroscience. And they've got around 100,000 people playing games to improve understanding of neuroscience. And there was a similar project by McGill called Philo, which is looking at genetic research. And they've done even better, and they've got around 300,000 people playing their games to hopefully improve our understanding of these various issues. So crowdsourcing is quite a wide and varied mix, but it's a fascinating movement to get people involved from outside of the traditional environments. So I think it's positive in all of the ways that it's currently
that's
working.
a great point that you make there, Adi, which is about getting people involved from outside of the usual environments. And I was very struck earlier on this morning when Yen was talking about some of his ideas around creating the embryo atlas and looking at that very much in a crowdsourcing kind of model. But I guess within our sector, perhaps sourcing out actually to a very sort of codified crowd, as it were. Is there anything that we can learn from the more generic crowdsourcing that can be applied to crowdsourcing or co-creation within the sort of biotech and pharma space?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are various motivations that encourage people to get involved. The traditional four, you've got money, the fame and notoriety of doing something in a crowdsourced way, doing something socially worthwhile, and doing something that's a fun and worthwhile experience. So the various projects tend to tap into each of those motivators. And if you're looking to tap into the crowd yourself, then you're likely to be relying on some of those motivators for your own projects. But I think a nice study was done into the citizen science website Zooniverse. Now, they don't pay people, so the extrinsic side of things is completely out of the question, and they were looking purely at the intrinsic motivators for why people get involved in crowdsourcing. And they found that the overwhelming majority of factors were that they enjoyed the topic and they got something cognitively worthwhile out of actually participating. But something else that's interesting that came out of the research was that they found that the best performing users in that on the Zooniverse platform was something like 100 times more effective and more productive than the average contributor. So it's really important to identify who your core users are and identify what they're going to be getting out of it and what they value from engaging with you.
Dan, you've obviously spent quite some time thinking through this and what might incentivize people to get involved. What's your experience?
Yes, I have. I've lost a lot of hair doing that too. So I think a lot of people, they approach crowdsourcing and be like, okay, cool, I get a lot of work done for free. And then they're somewhat disappointed when they realize that a community isn't like stupid and they won't just like do your work for you for free. And so oftentimes you have to think to yourself, okay, what do I want to get done, right? Could this be done by a layperson? Could this be, do I need like technically skilled people? And you have to really think about, first, what are you doing? What needs to be done? And then think to yourself, okay, who could do it, right? Is it general public? Is it technically skilled? Or are they going to need resources? Is it just sort of like a mind exercise? They could just veg out of their computer and just think about things or put it on a piece of paper, or do they need to go into the lab and submit some results, right? In Incentive, they have a lot of different challenges. They use challenge-driven innovation to do things. They haven't found a way to scale or to make money. They've been kind of like lumbering along for about 10 or 15 years. But a lot of people that join some of their challenges have to go out and spend some money. And so they have to take that into account when they're putting their prize together, as well as they need to be technically skilled. Other sorts of platforms that are, again, just asking people to crunch some data, that doesn't cost the users anything other than time, but they need more technically skilled people, like a soccer mom. No offense to soccer moms, couldn't usually do that sort of thing. And so you have to ask, what are you trying to do? And then once you find out what you're trying to do, who you're going to need to do it, then yeah, you could structure an incentive scheme around that. And so what we've looked at, and my colleague here has actually touched upon a few of those, is 4 key things. All right, one, so we actually try to engage a technically skilled user base, and so we try to allow them to demonstrate their mastery. So oftentimes we work with people who are have a PhD or a postdoc in maths or physics, and they go home and their girlfriend doesn't know what they're talking about, right? But they could come onto our platform and engage with other people and actually show, hey, I'm actually pretty bright. This sort of 13 years in the lab was, has led to something. The second thing is prestige. And again, he touched on that to where, yeah, you get some credit beyond, just a monetary reward. You're recognized for your contributions, whether you win or not. But, that could be, some platforms do it in points, some do it in badges, but some do it in rankings. But either way, you're recognized for your contributions. And, you could quantify that. That actually means something. That gets people excited. And the other one is kind of this tension between collaboration and competition. And there's a few platforms that get it really, really well. And I'll go into 1 or 2 of them if we have time at the end, where they actually get people to work together, be it either in teams, but also they're competing with each other, and that kind of adds to the platform's value. And again, the last bit is going to be finance. You find that money isn't the biggest motivator for most people. You want to give enough money commensurate with the task to remove money from the equation, so they're not thinking that they're getting ripped off. But if you make it exclusively about the money, there's actually pretty good data out there that people get less creative, that you actually get poorer results if people are doing it just for the money and not for the demonstration of mastery, not for the prestige, not for the collaboration. And so it's kind of a fine balance on how much money you want to give out, if any.
Stefan, from your perspective, coming at this from a sort of pharma industry side of things, is it a different question for you? Is it working yet?
Working. We're at the beginning and it's working. We have some good examples, but I would just take a minute and probably look at it from 2 angles. So on the one end, we have these, let's say, deprioritized drugs, or we have drugs which can be repositioned. There are researchers in academia and universities and hospitals working on their PhD thesis and may have an idea how to reposition a drug. Coming up with a new idea. We have recently C.10 for pulmonary hyperpressure. Now it's for peripheral arthritis disease. So a complete new indication, and it's working. We got really good ideas. What's the incentive for them? I think the incentive for them is they get some funding for the research, but also you need to put out an award. So it's really an attraction for them to get engaged. The other group I see is a completely different group. These are patients. And at the end, we all want to do something for the patient. That's the forefront of the work we do. So if you go on the internet and, for example, you just try to get into a user group or a patient group on diabetes, it's amazing. These people have such an interest. They know exactly what it means for them, what the disease is they suffer from. I'll give you another example. On the rheumatoid arthritis patients, we in academia or we in pharma, we think about the immediate reduction of pain. But for them, it's getting out of bed in the morning, taking a tablet, which shows an effect by the time they get out of bed, not taking the tablet by when you get up, because then you suffer for a couple of hours before you see the benefit. So these are some ideas you can pick up when you talk to those user groups, to those patient communities. And they have a deep interest, and I think that's also the interest of pharma, really to develop medicines where there is a clear benefit. And I think this is also part of crowdsourcing, which I think is equally important.
Brilliant, thank you. Probably time to throw it open to the floor for questions. Right at the back.
Hi, Tracy again. So with crowdsourcing, I mean, clearly that is on the rise. Culturally, that is on the rise. But what do you think the influence will be on the employment side, as far as companies that are looking to develop project teams and product development teams and employ people consistently for long term on these projects, and yet utilize the public and access and tap into that innovative set to try and achieve their goals? So what influence do you see, if any, that crowdsourcing will have on the job market?
So from our perspective, I think like labor leaders have actually been quite anti-crowdsourcing because it's a very easy way to insource a huge amount of labor and give them no benefits, and you could quickly scale up, quickly scale down. And Campbell, for instance, is one I didn't talk about. They're crowdsourcing for data scientists, to where a lot of large corporations come to Campbell and they give them their data set. Like, you know, GE might want to improve some flight times for some of their partners or this or that. And what they're able to do is immediately tap into a very, very high-end pool of data scientists from around the world, get their project solved, pay for it, and then move on. And so it's great sometimes for the person who's seeking the solution, and temporarily you could say it's good for the person who's providing it. But it's very clear, I think, on both ends. I don't think it's exploitive at all, by the way, is my opinion, because both parties know. But it doesn't provide, I would say, long-term security for those people. I know nobody who really makes a living on crowdsourcing. But again, you could be an outsourcer, right? You could be a freelancer. There's plenty of freelance sites out there where people are outsourcing tasks. Again, it's not, I wouldn't call it crowdsourcing. It's generally, it's just a scalable outsourcing. A lot of times it's just scalable outsourcing. What you mentioned the design for the Indian new currency, right? And so there's many sites out there that, you know, outsource design. There's plenty of unemployed designers out there, you know, willing to hawk their services, and you don't have to be, you know, in New York City to work for a client in New York. You could be in Ireland, you could be in Russia, and you just submit your design. So there's, you know, 99 designs, 500 pixels. There's a lot of different design sites where, you know, you as a person looking to insource some design expertise, you're able to do that. Plenty of sites out there that allow you to outsource your web development. I have a pretty good website. I have no idea how to code, and, you know, most everything was outsourced to India initially, and that wasn't crowdsourcing, but I did put the project out, got, you know, 50 to 100 bids on the project, and then, you know, had it done for me. So I wouldn't again say that, you know, it's just, you know, crowdsourcing some new way of employment. It's oftentimes it's just another way of looking at a scalable outsourcing platform, and employers or employees, they're not going to have long-term security unless they have, you know, a deep pipeline of clients. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think there's another question from the floor. I'm just going to allow one panelist to answer at a time, so we can be sure to get a few before lunch.
Derek Shearer from Norgine. I think my question is principally for Stefan. I think AstraZeneca and MRC have done a couple of really interesting and innovative projects, such as the one you were saying with the unprioritised medicines. Also the corporate credit scheme we did with MRCT, and I think Lilly as well with their open innovation platforms and what have you. Do you think the industry is doing enough to say, to communicate what your experiences and successes or failures are from those initiatives, so as to encourage best practice, but also to encourage other companies to make assets like that available, or to encourage the academic community to actually get involved?
I think we have had a very good start. It's very promising. But But there is one thing, we started with the deprioritized drugs. So what about the drugs we already have and still are active in development? What about the live drugs? I think there needs to be a more courageous effort across pharma in this area. And to get there, it is very important to communicate very transparent the successes and failures. And maybe you're absolutely right, there is something we have to do to more broadly communicate the work we are doing from the partners as well as from industry.
Thank you. Do we have a final question? We do.
Thank you. Chris Ford from Lancaster University. Ian was mentioning earlier about getting out more and finding out more about what's going on. And the research I've done has been looking at sort of crowdsourcing and other similar things in various industries, telecoms, financial services. And I wonder what you're doing as an industry to engage with other industries that are experimenting in these areas and to sort of extend your knowledge base through these different interactions.
Another and different question related to convergence, I think.
Yeah, I can take this. There's a nice quote by William Gibson, sorry, and he basically said that the future already exists, but it's unevenly distributed. And I think that applies in all manner of ways, and certainly in open innovation. And so it's very worthwhile looking at what other industries, what other companies within your own industry, governments, non-profits, and all of these various groups are doing in the sense of tapping into knowledge that traditionally sits outside of their organisation. And there are lots of websites, events, conferences that you can go to get the latest information on what is going on across industry and across platforms, whether it's crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, you name it. There are resources out there that can help you to tap into that.
It's a very interesting question, actually, and I will take Chair's privilege just before we wrap up to say that this issue of what can you learn between sectors is hugely interesting. We ran last year as Praxis Unico a What Industry Wants event, and those of you who were here will know how successful that was. But one of the really interesting things that came out of that was that various company participants really enjoyed it because they had a chance to understand business models that were being adopted, not just by their immediate competitors, but also others within different sectors, and we deliberately mixed some of the sessions up. And I think that sort of learning from peers, particularly in industry, very compelling this morning about how you actually make that much more porous within an SBC-like environment, but across industries, really ought to be able to make a bit of a step change. I guess we're probably done on time, aren't we, Steve?
I'm afraid so, and I hope, can I just thank you all and thank the panel for our last session of the morning. It's been fabulous stuff, thank you.